Oh no. Hello, welcome. Welcome to Enlightning. I'm so fortunate to be here today with Andy Grabner. Hello, Andy. Will you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. First of all, you just told me that this song was made by your brother?
Yeah, my brother made it for me for the show.
Awesome. I think I should give him a call because we may need some jingles as well for some of the stuff that we are doing.
Absolutely, please.
Yeah. So Andy Grabner, what shall I say about myself? I'm obviously proud about the open source project Keptn, as you can see here. Shirt, hat, everything. The hat is also.
Love your enthusiasm.
I also love my swag, especially because the hat is kind of covering my receding hairline. So it's all good. Thanks for having me on the show. Just a couple of words about myself, who I am. I am a DevRel for Dynatrace, where I focus on topics like DevOps, SRE, and observability, because Dynatrace is in the observability space. But I'm also a DevRel for Keptn, and really trying to help the community to use what we've built with Keptn. And I know we are going to dig into deeper what Keptn is all about, so I won't spoil kind of anything now.
I have a very important opening question, and that is it Keptn or Captain? Or I've heard different pronunciations.
Yeah, that's
What's the final word?
It's Keptn. And like you may want to wonder why it is. Why Keptn? Because we are, well, where do you think I'm from?
Oh goodness, that's a I don't know. Tell me.
Well, I am from Central Europe. It's a small country, and it's in the Alps. So the country is called Austria. Our language, our native language, is German.
Okay.
So the German pronunciation and also the phonetics for a captain of a ship is Keptn. That's the German phonetic, because would be right. And obviously with Kubernetes and cloud native, everything kind of has a nautical theme to it. And so every Kubernetes cluster obviously needs a captain, and every container needs to be steered by a captain into the safe harbor of production. And so everybody needs a captain, and we are German speaking, and
that was my question. Are all the founders German speaking? Yes, I love that. Yeah. That's wonderful. We have a lot of people to say hello to today. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for coming again this week. Zappies, welcome. Thanks for being here. Fuel so glad to have you. Fuel says Keaton. That must be it. Vice Ferrix here. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see everybody. Thank you for coming. So how long has Keptn existed?
Well, I would say, I hope I don't mess it up now, but a little more than 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it was a little over 3 years ago. I think there's a blog post out there where we celebrated our first year, then we celebrated our incubation status last year, or early this year actually, in the CNCF. But yeah, it was a little over 3 years ago.
Nice.
Thing, yeah.
Keptn's been in tech longer than I have.
That's also why he is a receding hairline. He's older, and therefore he shows age.
I'm 43. I'm older maybe than I seem, but
So are you the same age actually than me?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
But apparently a lot more hair. I'm not. So I guess that's actually a great question for you. Maybe is like someone newer than me, younger than Keptn, who's in the tech field. I understand you've been around for like 15 years. What's some advice you have
for somebody that wants to get started in the tech field? I'm really excited about what's happening in open source, and not just now, but what's been happening for many years. And I think it's a great opportunity for everyone that wants to get started and kind of enter our communities that we have. And what we have seen, especially on the Keptn side, and I'm pretty sure this is true for any open source project out there, We have a lot of people that, either are switching jobs because they are, we know about the big resignation. I think that's what it's called. People switching jobs, and IT is a great way to go. We also have a lot of students that want to just get started and get some experience.
Oh, yeah.
But we see a lot of folks that come to us and other open source projects and say, hey, how can I contribute? And some are maybe a little bit intimidated in the beginning because they say, I'm new, know my way around.
I relate. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I can tell you is check out the existing projects, check out the documentation, run through the getting started and the tutorials, and then contribute back by providing your feedback on what was your experience. A big challenge for all of us that are building new software in the open source space is to keep documentation up to date, to keep tutorials up to date. And we build it at a time, but then the product is evolving or the project is evolving, and sometimes documentation and tutorials don't catch up. And this is why it's really great to have people that start their career in IT by actually providing feedback to a new technology that they're trying out. And yeah, that's what it is. And maybe last comment on this: a lot of open source projects a lot of them obviously live on GitHub. We typically put issues out on GitHub, and we label them typically as good to start.
Okay.
Like a good first issue, and some of them are documentation based, tutorial based, or simple fixes.
And I know some projects, I'm not sure about Keptn, but so you can shadow someone maybe. Like I remember when I've contributed with Kubernetes, I did a shadow shift for a while. So I could feel comfortable, and even like the GitHub etiquette, I was so new that I was shy about every step.
Yeah. So we have regular Keptn developer meetings, community meetings. So they happen on a regular basis. I think every project probably does it differently, but yeah, we try to engage and help people as much as possible. We are very active on the Slack, so don't feel shy to ask a question on Slack. And as I always say, there's never a stupid question. There's just stupid people that don't ask because they think they know everything or are afraid to ask. So don't be that person. Just ask.
Absolutely. Some more people to say hi to. Hello, Mark. Thanks for coming. And hello from India. Thanks for coming. I have a question for the chat. Who's going to be at KubeCon? Also, another pronunciation thing. Who says KubeCon and who says KubeCon? But yeah. And Thomas is here. Hi, Thomas. Are you going to be at KubeCon? No. And hi, Rick. Who's going to be at KubeCon? And how about you, Andy? Are you going to be there?
I will be at CuteCon.
CuteCon.
Yeah, no, I'll be. I pronounce it KubeCon, but
Cube, yeah,
like a cube.
But it's Kubernetes, right? So yeah.
No, it's a good point actually. So we, obviously, I'm not a native speaker. And we get raised in school. We learn more British English, but I lived in the States for many years. So maybe my way of pronunciation is messed up anyway. I don't know. So
I grew up here. I have no excuse.
Yeah,
I don't know.
But I will be in Detroit. Yeah, I will be there. We have a Keptn booth. We have a Keptn booth in the project pavilion. Yeah.
Excellent. I will 100% stop by. You can save me a hat.
Hat, shirt. We also have sweaters. I think we have a lot of swag. Yeah.
So we have some no's to KubeCon so far. Feel stable, no, and Thomas, not this time. But thanks, Thomas. My friend and colleague Mauricio and I are doing a keynote at KubeCon, actually 2 weeks from today, and that may not be the sole obsession of my life at this moment.
Check your feedback? What's the heart rate?
Even talking about it is making my heart rate jump, actually. But I think it's going to be really good. It's going to be pretty. I think it's informative, but then like lighthearted and hand drawn and kind of silly like me. So we'll see. It'll be entertaining.
Well, I think in times like this, we all need a little bit lightheartedness, whatever. you can see that my English is not my first language here.
You're awesome. You're doing great. So speaking of Thomas is going to be a speaker, as will I, at Spring 1. So that's something my team's putting on, and I'm just going to drop a link to it in the chat with a promo code too, if anyone can go to that. But that's December 6th through 8th in San Francisco. So if you want to come and hang out there, please do. And I'm going to start moving behind the board. I have questions for chat. One is, if you've never heard of Keptn, then what do you think it is, based on the name of it, and maybe based on whatever you have seen kind of peripherally but haven't paid too much attention to? Like, what are your impressions? And then if you do have it and know it and use it, let us know that too. And I'd be interested to know what you think of it from a user perspective then. And then I'm going to drop a bunch of links in the chat, and Andy is going to go over what they are while I move. So here we are.
Awesome.
All right.
Yeah, I'll take it over from here and let you move over. I'm actually really interested in hearing what people. Wow, this is like Blair Witch Project now, if you remember that movie.
So shouldn't I walk by this light, right?
Yeah, don't get killed, okay? Because this is what happened to the people in Blair Witch Project.
If this is how I go, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Okay. I am really interested to hear, folks. If you never heard about Keptn, what do you think? Yeah, I'm not spoiling anything. Sorry, it's an old movie.
If you haven't seen it by now, that's on you.
Yeah. What I wanted to say, I'm really looking forward to get some feedback, folks, from the questions that Whitney was just asking. So if you've never heard about Keptn, what do you think it is based on the name? Because the project name, or a name of any product or framework, sometimes tells you things. Sometimes it doesn't make sense at all. So I just want to see what you think. And for those that know Keptn, don't just copy and paste it from the website, but just tell me in your own words. What do you think it is? And now to some of the links. She was posting, let's say, the first one, Keptn.sh. Keptn.sh, this is really the page, our landing page, our website, where you find all information about what Keptn is all about. You get all of the links from there to the community, to the Slack, to the tutorials, to the documentation, to the Git repository, obviously, right? Keptn, like most other open source project, lives on GitHub. So check it out, Keptn.sh. And I think there's also some videos on there, some resources, some recordings. We do regular recordings of our users. We have user groups or user group meetings, and we have Keptn users just present on what they do with Keptn. We also have the links to the developer meetings, and that also happen on a regular basis, all available there. Now, the second link I think is really interesting, but I want to skip this for now. I want to keep this one for last. The third link that is there, the Keptn.sh/docs/quick start. Well, as the name implies, this is the quick start guide. Every project needs a quick start, and over the 3+ years that we have worked on Keptn, we updated this quite a bit. We also learned a lot from the early days to where we're now on how to make the quick start easier, because the name implies you have a quick start, and sometimes we haven't been that quick because why are you laughing?
It more than implies it.
Yeah, I know.
It promises it.
Yeah, but it always depends on who you ask what you mean with quick, right? Ask a snail how quick she can move from point A to point B, and then, but
touche.
Yeah. So, but the quick start is obviously your way. But then the last link, I really like this. I think this is the best quick start that you can ever actually have. Our friends at Killer Coda. This is a platform that I think a lot of open source projects are actually using. We have a code lab style tutorial, so with different steps where it walks you through it. And quick start compared to the age of the universe, exactly. Yeah. See, we have some funny people out there.
Touche.
Yeah. The Killer Coda is really good. So it's a tutorial it's a code lab tutorial style, but the nice thing is, so Keptn needs a Kubernetes cluster, and maybe you don't have a Kubernetes cluster at hand. Maybe you don't want to spin up a machine where you can run a lightweight cluster with an install Keptn. So the killer coder tutorial is a tutorial, but you automatically get your target environment. That means you get a pre-configured Kubernetes cluster, and as you're clicking through the individual tutorial steps, you just copy and paste it over in a command shell that you also get, and it's super easy then to just go from everything from installing Keptn on a bare-bone Kubernetes cluster to setting up the first project and then running the automation with Keptn, so everything is there. And now to the last link, which is actually the second link that she posted. This is the github.com/Keptn Sandbox Lifecycle Controller. This is an interesting project which I started because Keptn, as it is right now, right, 3.5 years or so, we are at a certain stage where we want to finish, kind of wrap up version 1.0. We want to get to version 1.0, and then we take all the lessons learned and we want to figure out what's next. And the Keptn Lifecycle Controller is something that is the big next thing, because we learned a lot of things, what we did well with Keptn, what I think we should maybe no longer focus on, because other frameworks are out there that are also doing a much better job in certain aspects. And so we want to focus on things on problems that really need to be solved. And this is where one of the aspects is the lifecycle controller. Wow, now I've talked. Did I talk enough for you to get ready?
I'm ready to go. I want to acknowledge some comments. Feel Stable can't see scary movies. You want to, but they're not good for you. I'm interested in that. You have me curious. Feel Stable. Nick, the first one's here. Hello, Nick. Thanks for coming. And then we have an answer to our question. So this is a guess. So Keptn leads team similarly. So therefore, a Keptn manages DevOps tools in Keptn. Is that correct?
That is actually a really nice. I never heard this, but it is. It's a great explanation for a key core concept of Keptn, which is connecting all of your DevOps tools in a new open standard way and orchestrate them so that you don't have to build and manage the integration between your individual tools. So it's like, this is
nice.
leads the team.
Good job.
Similar. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. And so what I would love to do to start is for you to paint a picture for me of what the tech world looks like before Keptn existed. Mm-hmm. And that made you think we need a tool that does this. And then, so tell me about the world 3.5 years ago.
Yeah. So at least the world that, as we have seen it, the people that started Keptn, we have worked with a lot of organizations, and it also includes the organization that I'm employed at, where we saw that we're moving towards cloud native, and cloud native opened up a lot of new possibilities. However, the tooling around cloud native was still kind of the same old that we had when it comes to continuous delivery and also operational aspects. So we actually sat down and said, how would we build an end-to-end delivery pipeline? Which tools would we use to get automated delivery in different stages, automated testing, automated evaluation if the deployment was successful, automated notifications. So we want to always get kind of feedback on what's actually happening, and if things actually go towards production, how can we integrate tools that can ask a human being for an approval and give it recommendations? So we looked at all of the tools and what is necessary to build a delivery pipeline to deploy cloud native applications. And then we also looked into what does it take, what tools does it take, and what effort does it take if an application runs in production and something fails, something happens. What tools would we use and how will we integrate them to notify the right people, to get on a call? Or the better thing is we also looked into auto remediation. So how can we then execute, bring the system back to a healthy state? And what we have seen is that both for the delivery aspect, the multi-stage delivery, as well as for the keeping things healthy in production, so the continuous operations, a lot of tools existed, but it took a long time and a lot of effort to integrate all of these different tools together, to maintain those scripts, And what was also very interesting is that in a typical organization that we have seen, you typically have more than one deployment tool. You have more than one testing tool. You have more than one way of notifying people, and maybe you have more than one observability tool. And what we then realized is that all of these tools, while 2 testing tools, what do? They test. 2 deployment tools, what do? They deploy. They all had their proprietary APIs, their proprietary ways of giving back status, of reporting success or failure, which meant in a typical organization, you had to build a lot of boilerplate code, a lot of scripts to actually kind of model your processes and then say, calling tool A, waiting for the result, parsing the result, calling then tool B, and if this fails, then do this. And a tool of choice, obviously, and that's also what we chose, was Jenkins for this. So we chose Jenkins as kind of like our orchestrator. We got JMeter in, we got Neoload in as a tool. We looked at Prometheus as observability. We looked at Dynatrace as observability. So we looked at multiple different tools that do a particular job. We looked at Helm. And then we tried to build kind of like a Jenkins pipelines that could actually do all this, but then also be easy to switch tools, right? Because maybe one team wants to use JMeter for testing, the other one another tool. And to switch tools, that meant you had to then maintain a different type of pipeline, different type of integration. And this was really tough. And so we said, we need to solve a couple of problems. First, the first problem we wanted to solve is every time we deploy into an environment, before we deploy and also after we deploy, we want to figure out, A, can we deploy right now? Is the environment healthy? And B, after the deployment, is the environment still healthy? Does the application run as expected? So we knew that we need to figure out how to get observability as a core component into everything we do around continuous delivery, right? We have to observe the system and at every stage say, is this environment healthy? If so, then I can deploy. If it's not healthy, then maybe I'll stop deploying because I first need to fix the environment I want to deploy into, right? And after the deployment, sorry, go ahead. You got a question? Yeah?
I want to acknowledge some chat. I want to make sure what I have here is correct, and then I want to move on to these 2 problems about.
Of course. Okay, so many tools. Many tools for end-to-end delivery looks good. Many tools for observe and once deploy. Yeah.
Let's talk. Fuel Stable says, does the world need another tool? The answer is always yes. But Fuel Stable does agree that Jenkins is good to provide unintended automation.
And I don't want to. Jenkins is an awesome tool. Don't get me wrong. But we just saw that as we are building cloud native applications that are all event driven and decoupled, building kind of static pipelines that doing things on a process step by step may no longer be the right way to deal with delivery.
Yes. That depend on each other too. Kote, so many tools. Thanks for coming, Kote. So Fuel Stable says many Jenkins servers back in the day were configured to run scripts as root.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's powerful, right? It's a Swiss Army knife, and if you know how to handle a Swiss Army knife, you can do everything with it. The question is, what happens if you that knows how to deal with the Swiss Army knife are no longer there? What happens if some of these integration maintainers of these Jenkins plugins are no longer maintaining their plugins? Do you need to write your own? Or some organizations had to write their own plugins just for the reason because they were not allowed to just download any additional plugin from somewhere, and that's why we spent a lot of time in just building and plugging tools in together and just maintaining it.
So the world 3.5 years ago, we have tools for end-to-end delivery. So from source code all the way to production, there are many tools that sit in between those 2 things. And then on top of those tools, once your application even is deployed, there's another whole suite of ton of tools that are going to monitor and remediate what you have going on. So that's the so many tools that aren't necessarily made to integrate with each other. They all have their own APIs. They have to download a library to use one. And so a lot of integrations need to happen. Sometimes those are happening custom integrations with Jenkins. And so that's and also we have the fact that teams might want the tools for their particular application on top of the whole world of tools. So that's the problem space that exists with Keptn.
Exactly. Yeah. One more thing. Even though you have it there with observability, but I believe one critical thing is, and this is why this is one of the first problems we then try to solve, is that 3.5 years ago, we all knew we had to figure out, is the environment that I'm deploying into healthy, and after I'm deploying it, is it still healthy, or did the tool that I just interacted with, did it do its job, yes or no? So that means it was always about, are we in a state where we're healthy, yes or no? And so you had to put this typically into your own custom scripts, where you always had to ask the tool, did the job go well? Yes, my tests went well, but now I broke the environment and now nobody can do anything anymore. But so it was always about figuring out how is the overall health of your environment. And this is what a lot of people just put in also manual by pulling out parsing reports from a load testing tool, reaching out to your observability platform, figuring out if everything is healthy, if going into your log management tool and figuring out there's no strange exceptions going on. I don't know, pinging your system from the outside to figure out if it's still accessible from the outside and didn't break anything. So the concept of constantly validating, you had to constantly validate with every step along the way if you're not breaking things. I hope this makes sense.
So basically you're saying the problem isn't only integrating these tools so that they can talk to each other, but that they also need to be constantly health checked.
Exactly, that's what it is, right? Because these tools, they all operate in a different way on your target system. The target system might be dev, the target system might be a QA environment, a staging environment, production environment, and you have different tools that are kind of making changes to it. And with changes, I mean, you deploy, that's a change. You run some load, you change because you change the system because you're putting load on it, and so you're changing the dynamics. And so you want to know, is the system healthy? And you want to build these health checks in at all the time,
So Fuel Sneeble's spidey senses are tingling. This is starting to feel like we're going a bit into observability here.
Observability is definitely going to be a key topic. Yeah, true.
So Fuel Sneeble says, don't we all just deploy to prod? Why spend money on an expensive test environment?
Yeah.
Fuel Sneeble also knows about incident management is one of his areas of expertise. Maybe somehow related.
Actually, I wanna say one thing here. I heard in our organization, right? We also have multiple stages, but we try to keep them as minimum as possible. There is obviously a good reason why you do testing early on, because you want to capture things that are clear failures, whether it's functional or security or anything like this. But our lead of our DevOps team a couple of years ago said, for her, the maturity of an organization is indirectly proportional to the number of stages you have in your environment. Meaning, the more stages you have, the more immature you are. The less stages you have, the more mature you are. Now, I know this is a great general statement. I also understand that just having a single production environment is not an option for every company because of regulatory reasons and things like this. But to the point of Fuel Sneeble's, right? Maybe we should all just deploy into production and then forget about all the other environments if you architect and build your system the right way.
So we have a question for you. What were the tools integrated in Keptn? Does Keptn work with Rancher, OpenShift, Tanzu, and managed Kubernetes instead of just vanilla Kubernetes?
So Keptn itself runs on any type of Kubernetes flavor. Keptn is a control plane. At Keptn itself, the control plane runs on any Kubernetes flavor. But from an integration perspective, Keptn uses an event-driven approach. That means in order for Keptn to interact with a tool, it sends an event. It's actually a standardized event. We're using Cloud Events, which is also another CNCF project. So cloud events kind of standardizes, how events look like that we use in the cloud native world. And Keptn is basically sending an event out and say, hey, I need a tool that can deploy this particular artifact in this particular stage. And then you can have a tool, whether it's Jenkins, whether it is Helm, whether it is Argo, subscribe to these events and then say, hey, I can do this. I want to do the deployment. I'm responsible for this because my team subscribes to this event for this particular tool. Now let me do my job. It's an event-driven model. And so to answer the question, which tools are we interacting with or integrating with? Well, we are integrating with any tool because we are providing and driving an open protocol standard on how we want DevOps tools in the cloud native space to communicate with each other. And we're not the only ones, right? We are trying to driving this standard through the CNCF community. That means cloud events are the kind of the core project that we use. But then on top of that, we have a so-called CD events project. CD stands for continuous delivery, where we're really specifying the payload of, okay, what information does an event need to contain in order for a deployment tool to actually, so that the deployment tool can do its job? Is the target namespace and the container enough, or does there need to be any additional information? The same thing for a test event. And yeah, you got a question?
So CD events, is that like a more specific version of a cloud event that also standardizes what needs to be included in that cloud
event? Exactly, that's the
Okay.
idea. So we wanna specify what's the payload of those events that are sent, so that if you're a testing tool vendor, you can say, well, maybe you support your own API, which is still good, but if you also support CD events, then any orchestrator, any control plane like Keptn or any other tool that is relying or supporting these type of event standards can then integrate with you. And I think this is the big challenge we wanted to solve. This is the thing we wanted to solve. One of the challenges, right? If you go up to so many tools, yes, we have so many tools, and the tools will not go away, right? But what can go away is the amount of time we spend to making these tools talk with each other. And the reason why it is so much effort to make these tools talk with each other, because every tool has their own API to get called, and therefore either tool vendors need to invest a lot of time to integrate with all of the other point tools, and they need to keep this up to date, or you need to write your own boilerplate code in form of a Jenkins script, in form of a bash script, whatever it is, to call tool A, get the response, and call tool B. Now, one of the things we want to solve here with standardizing on the events is really driving a standard so that finally all of the tool vendors say, we agree to this event standard. This is how I can get called, and I know what to do.
And that has the added benefit of what you're describing in a Jenkins pipeline is a synchronous interaction between tools, where if any one of them breaks, it can break the whole pipeline. Where what you're describing now with cloud events, since it's an event-driven model, you now have it's asynchronous between your tools, which has another host of advantages.
Exactly. Obviously, you still, even in asynchronous world, if you want to enforce a certain, let's say, process, we call it a sequence in Keptn, you still want to make sure that you know when a sequence is done, but you have different ways now. First of all, it's an event subscription model, so that means you have events here, right? Keptn can send different events for different tasks to be done, and on the other side, you can have one or multiple tools that subscribe to that event. The nice thing about this is you can define your process. You can say, in my organization, every time I get a new artifact, I want it to be, I first want to check the health of my environment, then I want to deploy, then I want to test, and then I want to evaluate the health of the environment again. So you specify the process, but then every team can basically say, okay, which tool is subscribing to the event health check? Which tool is then subscribing to the event deploy? Which tool is subscribing to the event test, and which tool is then again used to subscribe to the health check again? And the nice thing is about this It's loosely coupled. That means you can change tool subscriptions at any time. If you decide you're switching from one deployment tool to another, you just change your subscription. And here's the next cool thing. You can say, well, you know what? I want to have some auditing. I want to additionally have my Slack subscribe to all of these events because I want to get an audit trail of everything that's happening. And this works really super well in an event-driven model.
What I'd like to do is, we have a couple questions in chat, so I'd like to answer those questions. And then what I think I want is for you to kind of talk about that again, but maybe we can actually have like a concrete example and I can draw it. And then we can talk about those advantages and how they apply to our example. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds
awesome. Okay, great. So Feel Stable says, if we add another stage, not my wish, that means we're losing maturity.
Yeah, I think he was referring to the argument I said earlier. So I understand that, there's reasons why we have multiple stages, but I still thought that the comment that she made was really interesting, because if you just add more stages to just basically reduce the chance of failure in production, then maybe you should also think about making your architecture in general more resilient, so that failure in production won't have a big blast radius because you're doing things like canary deployments or feature flagging, or you have built things into your architecture where the system itself is resilient and more resilient to failure or to chaos. But again, I understand that having more than production is in most cases a good thing, because you can do certain things ahead of production, like unit testing, functional testing, some performance and scalability testing, and some security scanning and things like that are really important in software engineering.
And then I think maybe did you answer this question when you were kind of talking about how things work? But when we talk about standardizing the way tools communicate, it's
like an API. So what we are standardizing is basically the payload of that API. You're right. That's kind of what I mean with this. You can look at the Keptn spec. If you take your favorite search engine and type in Keptn spec, you will find the spec of the events that we're sending. And the idea with Keptn is, right, we have a broker, an event broker, and you can subscribe to those events. That means you will get an event that contains the information about, hey, this is what I want you to do. And that event, call it API or not, right, should contain all the information that tool needs to do its job.
So let's draw out an example based on what you described earlier.
Yeah. Okay. I would do it the way I have it in my PowerPoints typically when I explain it. I always have I know left and right is now strangely the different side for me, but anyway, on my left side, I typically say you have a certain process that you want to enforce, right? You have deploy, test, validate. Right? Maybe, you know what, call it process, but do a / call it sequence, because in Keptn we call it a sequence, an automation sequence, or just a sequence of tasks. Okay, exactly. So let's assume you have a sequence that is called deploy. Call the sequence deployment. Yeah, deploy, test, perfect, and validate. So this would be a sequence that you would typically kick off when you have a new artifact, right? When you have a new artifact, you want to deploy it, you want to test it.
What's an example of an artifact?
An artifact could be a container. You have an artifact, right? You're out of your CI, out of your continuous integration, you build a new piece of software and you package it up in a container, and then you push it to a container registry. That's an artifact, and that then kicks off your delivery process.
Okay. So in our example, just to make it concrete, we'll say we have a new container image, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and so now we want to deploy it as our first step in our sequence.
Exactly. Yeah, but let's say the reason why I specify this process this way, I basically say, hey, I don't care which tools the individual teams are using. What I care is that I enforce a certain sequence of tasks that should happen every time when a deployment happens. Okay, so now do me a favor. You can erase things, right?
Yes, yes.
Can you move the validate a little lower down? So I just wanna keep something in the middle for later to add. Okay? Just to validate. Yeah. So validate. Let's assume this is our first kind of sequence: deploy, test, and validate.
Okay.
Now, on the right side of it, you have team A on the top, right? Team A.
Okay.
Yeah, and let's say team A, they really they are big fans. They have Jenkins pipelines built in the past, and they have Jenkins pipelines that can deploy their containers. So they are using Jenkins as a tool for deployment. So write Jenkins on there.
Okay.
Jenkins, use Jenkins, and they basically subscribe to those events. So that means I would almost make like a dotted line over to the deploy, because that means they can subscribe to these events and say, hey, I want, when we have like a dotted line almost, and then they subscribe to the deploy event, and they say, hey, every time the team A is putting out a new artifact, I want this particular Jenkins pipeline to handle the deployment job. Yes, it's beautiful. Exactly.
Subscribe to deploy events, and then when a deploy happens, they want to run a Jenkins pipeline.
They want to run a Jenkins pipeline. The Jenkins pipeline is actually doing the deployment, and when it's finished, it basically lets Keptn know that it's enforcing the process on the left side. Everything was good or it was not good. Right? That's the way it works. You subscribe to an event. That means you are then doing your job. It's awesome.
Artifact is deployed via pipeline.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it lets Keptn know that it was successful.
Exactly, yeah. In the beginning, there's also like when the way this works, the event subscription model, if you subscribe to an event as an external tool, you need to respond back and say, yes, I can do it, and I'm starting my job. So you can actually send back, I'm starting, and then when you're finished, you basically report back you're finished with the final event. So Keptn can also keep track of where are we right now, right? But I think these are just some technical details. Whether you want to write it or not, that's okay. So team A uses Jenkins. Awesome. So team A also has decided they're using Selenium as a testing tool for the tests, right? So maybe they have Selenium.
SELENIUM.
Selenium, yeah. Selenium, yeah.
Selenium.
Exactly. That's a very popular functional testing tool, right? They say, hey, you know what? We want to make sure that functional tests get executed. So they subscribe to the test event. That means that Selenium gets kicked off after the deployment is finished. Right?
Okay.
And I would do the beautiful, beautiful green dots again to connect the dots.
Okay. So not when tests start, but when deploy is finished is when it gets kicked off.
So when deploy is finished, Keptn will look into the next task in the process definition, and that is test. So then it says, hey, I just deployed. Actually, not Keptn didn't deploy, but Jenkins deployed, did the job for it. When Jenkins reported back everything is good, then Keptn went to the next task definition, which is test, and is then saying, hey, and now I need a tool that can run tests for me. And team A may decide that is Selenium.
Okay. So when a test event happens, that's when team A gets notified the next step. Okay.
Exactly. And it's actually not the team gets notified, but the tool of choice will automatically be kicked off.
Okay. I see where we're going here.
Yeah, that's good.
Test sequence gets kicked off, right?
Exactly, yeah. And then we do.
Cool. Kicked off. Okay, so now we have that. Exactly. One thing, I have a question. So we did do I've done an episode on event-driven architecture. And one thing that seemed important during that episode was not like, we did it in the context of like a consumer application. So like once the order is received and processed, then something gets sent to the topic that it's processed, and nothing gets sent back. Like if there's a failure, I might go to a new topic that has failures. And what I understand is if you ask something to give it back to you, then that's when you're starting to build something that's more coupled, right? So that's more tightly coupled if it has to wait for a response.
Yeah, I think yes and no. I think if you're definitely waiting, and if you have specific timeouts in there, and also if you have if you're tightly coupled, means I'm calling exactly one endpoint and I don't allow any other party to interact with this piece of data that I have, right? And I think
in this case we need to hear back so we can move to the next step in the sequence.
Yeah, because we need to know when the tests are finished.
Okay.
Right? That's what it is. But you will see the real magic in about maybe 5 to 10 minutes when we're done with the full drawing.
Okay. Am I how am I doing real estate wise? Do I need to make anything bigger or smaller?
Yeah, what you need to do is you need to move validate even further down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Should we just leave it off for now until we're ready?
Leave it. Now, actually put it there because we want to keep this in mind. But further down, further down, further.
Ah, okay. This is
some really cool things coming.
I'm excited. So down here.
Maybe let's see. Yeah, put it there so at least we have it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So, let's assume after the tests, people want to make sure that the tests are successful and also the system is reporting that the system is healthy. Basically, we're looking at our observability data. We can look at things like we didn't blow out our memory, right? The system is healthy after the test ran and so on and so forth.
So that's part of what Keptn's doing in this process sequence is checking the system's health in between steps.
No, this is actually what now the next step is. That's the validate. The validate state. Yeah. The reason why I don't wanted you to put it down a little bit lower because I want to fill in more things in the meantime. So after you deploy, after you run some tests, we typically want to validate while the test was running. Did the system behave based on what we expected the system to do, right?
Yeah.
We stayed within our memory limits. We didn't have any critical log messages. We didn't have any crashes. We didn't have any impact to other systems that run in the same environment. And this is where the validate step comes in. Actually, in Keptn terminology, we call it evaluation. So maybe what I want you to do is you need to exactly call it evaluation. Yeah. And here, this is a core component that comes with Dynatrace. So team A don't need to decide which tool to use. Team A, if you on the same kind of horizontal line, write down the tool Lighthouse Service. So
like up here?
No, not here, but next to validate. Just go down in the same, and then over to the other team A. So like we had used Jenkins for deploy and use Selenium for test.
Got it.
Yeah, go down, go further down. Now go down, go further down because exactly. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. Okay. So use Lighthouse. So the Lighthouse service is part of a Keptn installation, and the Lighthouse service is connecting to observability tools. Observability tools would be a Prometheus, OpenTelemetry, it would be Jaeger, it would be Dynatrace, it would be Datadog, it would be Splunk. So this connects to your observability platform. We have built-in integrations, and they can also be extended. Now, what Team A just needs to do, it needs to basically say, what type of data do they normally analyze after a new build is deployed, after tests are executed? They can define things like, we want to make sure, as I said earlier, there were no crashes. So we want to go to our logging tool and make sure we didn't see any crash logs. We want to go to observability tool to make sure that we didn't have any high memory usage and memory leaks and things like this. Yeah.
So it's subscribing to these events, right?
That's
handled doing those
exactly.
And then
same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It subscribes to the evaluation, and this comes out of the box with a Keptn installation. Every time Keptn does an evaluate, it basically goes over to the Lighthouse service. Yeah. The nice thing here is the team A can now specify what type of indicators, what type of data the Lighthouse service should pull out from the different tools, like logging information, metrics, traces, events. What type of data from your observability platform should be analyzed? And the way this is specified is by so-called SLOs, service level objectives. So SLOs is a terminology from site reliability engineering, and SLO stands for service level objective. And as team A, you can specify what objectives do you have to consider your application or service or whatever you're responsible for. What type of indicators, what type of metrics, what type of data tells you that your system is actually healthy and your environment is healthy.
So when the evaluate event happens, you can define your own method for
exactly. You define your own SLOs. It's a list of SLOs, and these SLOs can be pulled in from your logging tool, from your monitor, from your observability tool, from your metrics, from your traces, from any type of tool that you would normally manually go to and say, I want to look at my logging report. I want to look at my metrics. I want to look at my traces, and then manually validate if everything is green. But Keptn allows you to specify this in a codified way. So you can say, Keptn, as part of the evaluation phase, I want you to reach out to these tools automatically through the same open source eventing mechanism, and you pull back the data, and then you tell me if this data is within my expectations. Okay.
So team A uses Lighthouse and subscribes to the evaluation. So when an evaluation event happens, it makes sure that the environment is healthy. And so team A is in charge of codifying and defining what a healthy environment looks like.
Exactly.
Does that capture all of your points, or is there something more you'd like for me to?
I think that's perfect. And I see that there's a Kamarashu, he was asking now a question, and this is perfect because this is why I left a couple of additional, like a little space in there, right? So,
and that question is, what about security and vulnerabilities?
Exactly. So, for now, well, what happens every time Team A is building a new container image, Keptn would orchestrate the process on the left. So it would first say, please deploy, Jenkins would deploy, please test, Selenium would test, please validate, and the Lighthouse would validate. It would basically run from top to bottom. Right?
So this happens whenever they want to build a container image.
Whenever they run a container image,
exactly,
off the screen. Whenever they build a new container, they would basically kick off the sequence. So maybe you wanna draw it in a different way. Maybe you just want to draw, because the sequence that you have, the deploy, the test, and the validate, these are tasks and they get executed in a sequence. Maybe you just want to draw a line down, because basically it starts from deploy, test, validate. So deploy is step number 1, test is step number 2, validate is step number 3.
So a container image gets built.
Yeah. This then kicks off the sequence, and the sequence has 3 tasks in there, and these tasks get orchestrated by the Keptn control plane by starting with deploy, then test, and then validate.
Cool. So then,
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Something like that. Awesome. So now, to answer the question, what about security and vulnerabilities? Up until this point, we use Jenkins to deploy, Selenium to test, and then whatever they specified to validate. All of a sudden, the organization says, "Ooh, we don't have any security checks in there, but we want to enforce this as a mandatory step. And we want to do this after the tests are running." So now what the team can do that is enforcing the process or defining the process, they can add an additional step between test and validate.
So this is pretty exciting, I imagine, because if it was based on the way it was before, to integrate another tool could be very cumbersome.
Yeah, and not only another, yeah, exactly. In this case, we are adding a new mandatory step in any sequence that is deploying in your, so you're now adding security between tests. Yeah, maybe a little, do me a favor, put it further down because I have some additional ideas. Further down.
Oh, okay, got it. Is it right above here?
A little, like yeah, a little up now, and here we go. Perfect. Yeah, security. Okay.
Love it.
Yeah. So now let's say the DevOps team or the security team or whoever manages the processes that should be enforced in the organization says, we mandate that security tests need to be done or some type of security checks. So we need to add a step that talks about security. And so now team A needs to say, all right, if you want to do if you do want us to do security, we need to pick a security tool. And I don't know, maybe they're using whatever tool comes to mind, Aqua Security or Falco or whatever. Uses security tool X. There's so many tools out there. Falco would be another great one. Yeah. Use Falco. Yeah.
Yeah.
And basically Falco subscribes to security.
Cool.
Right.
I'm trying to leave room and hear for my face.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have some ideas on where your face is right now. Yeah. Okay.
We'll figure it out. It's part of the fun.
Yeah. So now, so this already shows us the power that we have a separation of concerns. We on the one side define the process that one part of the organization, like the DevOps team or the SRE, whoever enforces processes can specify. And then the teams then can decide which tools should then handle a certain task, right? That's one cool thing.
Like this is like organization scoped maybe, and then this is like more grant team scoped.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Exactly. And multiple teams, team A, B, C, and D, they all share the same process, but they can then decide what tools to use. And if the organization decides to change a process, they change it once centrally, and then all the teams follow the same process, right? Makes sense?
Yeah. Autonomy. With tooling. Cool.
Now the real cool thing starts now. So.
Oh, it's not even cool yet. It's only starting.
It is already cool. It is already cool. So what if team A says, you know what, Selenium is a great tool, but it only does functional testing. But we now also want to add performance testing to the mix. So they can now
security stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we want to add another testing tool.
We want to add a second testing tool. So now team A can decide, hey, I additionally want to use a tool like, I don't know, Locust or, so uses Locust or maybe a tool.
I'm not familiar with any of these tools.
Okay. Locust is a open source load testing tool. So they want to use Locust, and so now they can also say, I want Locust to subscribe to the test event as well, because if we want to do tests, I want to do both functional tests and performance tests. So now that same tool can subscribe to that same test event, because in an event-driven architecture, multiple subscribers can subscribe to the same type of event.
Cool. I have two questions. One is, what kind of testing does Selenium do?
Functional.
Okay. And then I have a question. And that question is, do we want these two tests to run in tandem and they both subscribe to test, or do we want one to run after the other and they're chained together? Or do we have an option of how we set it up when we use the tool?
Keptn, you have an option. If you do it like this, and we have one task and both subscribe to the same event, then they would basically kick off at the same time. If you want to change that, you could introduce on the process side maybe a task that is called test functional and a second task afterwards, test performance. There's also yet another option where tools can also subscribe to an event when the previous tool finished. So there's different ways of doing this. Yeah.
So the tools themselves can give events when they're done.
Exactly.
Or is that how
remember every tool that participates. So I'm subscribing to an event. Yes. Keptn then gives me the event, and then the first thing the tool needs to do, it needs to say, Keptn, I'm taking it. I'm starting my action now. And it also sends a finished event when it's finished. And what you can do as a tool, you can also subscribe to any of the started and finished events, which means you can also act on when a different tool has finished a certain job or is starting a job. So in overall, there's actually 3 kind of stages of an event. The first one is triggered. So the first thing what Keptn does, it triggers an event, like it triggers a deployment, it triggers a test, and then the tool that is acting upon it can say, I am starting my action now and I've finished my action now.
Okay. Trigger, and then start, and then finish. And then do each of these stages also then emit events who want to know?
Exactly, yeah. So that means the nice thing is every other tool can also subscribe to the start and finished event. And this brings me now to the last piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
So let's say team A is using Slack, and they want to know every time a load test finishes, every time when Falco is catching a security problem, or every time the evaluation finishes and it either comes back successful or not. So what they can now do, they can have Slack as a tool and have Slack subscribe to events like test finished event, security finished event, evaluation finished event, and let this information be sent over to Slack as a message.
And how should I capture that here? That's not really.
It would still. I know it's going to be a little challenging on your drawing here. How would we do this? I would probably do it like this. Unfortunately, it would cover your face. How do we do this without covering your face?
It's all right.
Now,
I'll
actually
just
do it.
Like over here for the rest of the show.
No, do it like this. There's space between Falco and Locust. You see that? Just write Slack there. Slack. They use a Slack. Use a Slack.
And then, will you say again what Slack does so I can get a mental model in my head?
Slack is a chat tool, right? You know Slack.
Oh yes.
Yeah. And Slack, and as a team, as team A, I want to get notifications every time Keptn is finishing a test. Every time Keptn has finished a security scan. I want to just get an audit trail, Fuel Snabel said Slack is the bane of productivity. Yeah,
it's true.
Pick your evil, pick your poison, whatever tool you want. If you whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
So
team A wants to know updates.
What's happening? Wants to know about updates. Exactly. Yeah.
So Slack subscribes 2 events. Oops, I just wrote ints. I was so excited. And so the events that they're subscribing to are the finished events of each of these stages.
Exactly. They could be whatever the team wants, but I would say typically they want to get notified when a deployment is finished, when a test is finished, maybe when a security scan is finished. Maybe they only want to get notified if something fails, right? So they can subscribe to any type of event, and when they do the event subscription, you can also then filter. You can say, I'm only interested in events when the test finished with a failure, or when, right? So you have all the options.
So this whole thing is a sequence. What's one of them called?
A task.
A task,
yeah.
So let's say our team wants to be informed every time one of these tasks finishes, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Finishes. So therefore, it's going to subscribe to the finished portion because each of these has 3. So therefore, it's going to subscribe to just the finished portion of each one.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Yeah, awesome. And you're doing an amazing job in getting everything on this board.
I'm literally paid. This is my job. I'm a professional. Cool. Yeah, I'm following. Does anyone in the chat have any questions right now? Is everybody following what? Cool.
Slack, Fuel was Slack is the bane of production. Yeah, my tool is a small sound isolated box.
I have hours that I just keep all things turned off so that I can concentrate. Oh, here we have a question. Could you please elaborate on the event delivery guarantee? That's a great question. Is there an at least one guarantee? What about error handling? What if a tool on the right falls without sending any events back?
Yeah, so there's some time. So there's multiple things. There's timeouts. So that means even if nobody is consuming the event and nobody sends back a started event, after a certain timeout, then Keptn will just say, hey, the deployment task failed because nobody picked it up. Also, there's a timeout when Keptn receives a started event, but no finished event after a certain time. This is also why we actually have like a heartbeat as well, where a tool that has a longer running job can send back, hey, I'm still processing, so just so you know that I'm still there. That's one thing. If 2 tools, like in our case, Selenium and Locust, are both acting and they're starting, then Keptn will wait until all of the tools are finished. And that's the way it works. And yeah, this is the way. Hopefully this answers some of the question, Thomas.
Yeah. Is that good, Thomas? Do you need any clarification? This is really cool. So this is funny that it often makes sense to do this later in the show instead of up top. But what I would like right now is, we have another question. After we answer the question, the second thing I want is like a definition of what Keptn is that we can write down, that we can compare against our experience right now. But first, can we automate an operation environment?
Yeah, I think you can, right? Because that's what we see people do. I mean, this is a very simple example that we have here. See it like this: pre-deployment, you could have a task that is doing environment readiness. You could call and trigger a tool like Pulumi. You can call a Terraform script, Crossplane, whatever it is, and basically have the environment set up. Things like this, right? So and then also maybe at the end of a task, right? If you think about this, a lot of people are asking, can we use this to spin up an environment, deploy, test, evaluate, and then tear the environment down again? Just having these short-lived environments, that would be true as well, possible as well, because at the end, after the validate, you would just have let's say a tear down task and then just have it torn down. I hope this Komarashu, if you let me know if this actually made sense.
Did that answer the question? And Thomas says thank you, and hello to Deshaun. Good to see you, friend. Thanks for coming. So, what is Keptn?
We need to first answer one more question. Okay. Another question, because one thing you wrote down, which is a key core principle, is the SLO, the service level objective. I think that's really important. Yeah. And the reason why now, operation environment like ISC and can push on the hybrid cloud environment. That's, I think, Kamarashu, this is what he just asked another question. Yeah. Operation in the environment. Yeah. So you can, as I said, you can trigger any type of tooling, right? That's the nice thing, because the tools on the right, these are the tools that you would install on your target environment, and they subscribe to events. Now, we do have options on the Keptn side to make events, because most of these tools may not support these events yet. So what options do you have? We provide a simple webhook integration where you can subscribe a so-called webhook to an event and just call your existing tools through a webhook API. The other thing is we have a so-called job executor service where you can install a little container in your target environment, and that container can then subscribe to a Keptn event. And once the event comes in, it can, like a GitHub action, deploy any of your containers as a Kubernetes job. Typically, this is used if you have containers with your tooling built in, like your CI/CD tooling, your kubectl, your Helm, your whatever CLI you have. You bake it into a tooling container, and then you let basically Keptn, the job executor, execute that container on a target environment. And with target environment, I mean these individual tools then act or subscribe, right? They can sit anywhere if you have multiple stages. Secrets and certificates in the pipeline. The individual tools are basically, I think there's another question that just came in from Kamarashu. Sorry that I make you run around. Yeah, exactly. So a couple of things. The tools, right? They operate on a target environment. And like I was just explaining with this job executor, that job executor would run on your target Kubernetes cluster, and that job executor then needs to have access to the secrets from there, meaning Kubernetes secrets in that environment, and you can control it yourself, how much information and how much access control you give this particular tool. Another thing that we have, that is not, I think it's impossible to draw it here now. Behind every, so we started with the sequence, right? The sequence is essential in Keptn. Really, the way Keptn is organized, we have a project. You always create an automation project in Keptn, and you can define in that project one or multiple sequences, and you can even assign those sequences to multiple stages, a dev, a stage, a production. Behind every project, we also have a Git repository where you can put in your configuration files that your target tools need. For instance, your testing scripts, your deployment scripts, your SLIs, your SLOs. You can put that into the Git repository. You don't have to use it that way. If your tools, once they get triggered, have a different way of fetching the right information, like fetching the right test script or fetching the right deployment script, they can do it themselves. But Keptn itself also holds a repository for every automation project where you can put in config files that should be accessible by these individual tools at the time of execution. Yeah.
Excellent.
I know. So service level objectives. I just want to add one more thing before we come to the conclusion of what is Keptn in one or multiple sentences. For me, SLOs are extremely key because SLOs allow you to define the health of the system that you're responsible for, right? That's is really what SLOs are all about. You have certain objectives, and the objectives can come from different dimensions of data. It can be from logs, it can be from metrics, and so on and so forth. What Keptn does pretty well, and this is why I'm stressing this, in Keptn, you can specify a list of metrics. We call them indicators. So an indicator could be, as I mentioned earlier, do we have error logs? Do we have vulnerabilities? Do we have any performance problem because the metrics tell us there's something wrong? Do we have a memory issue? So you can specify a list of so-called indicators, SLIs, service level indicators.
I'm going to use a different color. Service level indicators. So what I'm hearing, service level indicator is a dimension of a service level objective.
Exactly. In our case, you define an indicator. So an indicator could be, as an example, number of vulnerabilities found, right? That would be a good one. That would be one indicator.
Defines an objective, or
the indicator defines how you like an individual
how
metric.
You measure.
Basically.
Okay.
Exactly. So I give you 3 examples. One would be number of found vulnerabilities. The second one would be failure rate of requests, and the third one would be memory consumption. Right? These are 3 metrics, because if you deploy a new application, you want to make sure you have no vulnerabilities, you have no failures as you're executing your test, and you're not exceeding your memory quotas. So you have 3 indicators. Right?
What's the test related one again, please?
I said failure rate. Did you have that?
Failure rate. Okay.
And
then I have is the metric, is the service level indicator the fact that the number of vulnerabilities is 0?
That's what you can specify, right? So you specify for every indicator what your objective is. So you can say, I want to have 0 vulnerabilities. I want to have a maximum of 40% memory consumption. I want to have only maximum 1% failure rate. So you specify your objective for every indicator.
Okay.
But then what Keptn does, and I think this is what I like about it, it looks at every individual indicator and whether it meets or doesn't meet the objective, but then it calculates out of all of the indicators a single SLO metric, a single metric that says how healthy is your system by looking at all of the different dimensions. Yeah.
So you define the health and how it's calculated, and then Keptn will turn around and just give you that makes a lot of sense for like if an operations level person can say what healthy is, and then a team level person can just see if it's working well or not. Instead of having to do that mental math or define it on their own.
Exactly. And now I would like you to do something. I know your face is perfectly now in the only spot that is left. But the way I always draw it, I always draw a circle, and then in that circle I write in my SLO. Let's say SLOs are typically expressed in percentage numbers. So 0 is bad, 100 is the best. And to come to the conclusion, what is Keptn? Keptn is a system that ensures that your system is always healthy, is always meeting your objectives. Because Keptn watches out every time you're doing you try to change your system, either through a deployment or whether in production, if a problem happens and you try to fix that system, Keptn is always there and keeps your system at a healthy state. That's really what this is all about. That's why the SLO, and this is actually something I should have thought about, one of the last kind of pieces of thing that I created from an educational perspective is I put the SLO in the middle, and I said the real only objective of you is to deliver and operate a healthy system that you can describe through SLOs. And every time you have a change coming in from development, or you have a problem coming in production, you're executing sequences of tasks where you interact with different tools with the sole purpose of, in the end, ending up with a system that is healthy again.
Excellent. So
it's like I have maybe one more thought, and maybe this helps you. Maybe see it like this: Keptn is like an operator, right? An operator in Kubernetes is always trying to keep your technical desired state in your environment. Technical desired state means you have a definition of what you want to deploy, and then the operators are taking care that what you have specified is actually there. Keptn takes this a level higher. Keptn says your desired state is to keep everything green, and we do whatever it takes to keep the system green, even though you're changing your technical desired state.
So, for example, so you're not using Keptn to actually change the state of your system. You're choosing other tools to do that. So Jenkins, for example, on this one, everything else is just looking. But and then Keptn is watching everything and help to make sure that
Keptn is a control plane that orchestrates all of your tools to make sure that your system operates based on your objectives.
Oh no. We lost our buddy. So it's just us in here, and I see that there are a ton of questions in chat. So let's put this together on our own. Keptn is a control plane that orchestrates. Here he is. Let me try again. Oh, I lost my chat over here. It seems like, have I been live this whole time, or it says I'm live on my screen? I have to move. Okay, we got my iPad, and I see Andy. Got to add him. And my iPad can come away. There's it's always exciting around here. Yes, and I was still live the whole time. Okay, so Keptn is a control plane that orchestrates.
Keptn is a control plane that orchestrates all of your DevOps tools to ensure the system you're responsible for is operating based on your objectives, based on your SLOs.
Sure that your system is operating based on your objectives.
Based on your SLOs.
Love it. We have some questions. How do you, did we do secrets?
We had that already,
Can you explain how to configure HA, high availability, for Keptn?
Yeah, I think there's, if you look at the Keptn doc and also the architecture, there's a couple of components. Everything, Keptn itself, as you probably have figured out by now, is a container-based system. When you install it, you get the control plane, you get a couple of services like the Lighthouse service. We use Nets internally as our events bus. We have some other core services that come with the tool, and we have done what we could so far to really make sure that all of these individual components are deployed at least in multiple instances. We are still at the 0.19 release right now, so we have not yet reached 1.0, even though this is the goal. There's still, I think, some requirements for HA out there we left on the roadmap, but some of these things have already been built into the architecture. If you want to know more, I think the best would be, hook us up on Slack, slack.keptn.sh. That's the best way to contact us, and then just we can have a discussion about your specific HA requirements.
I'm just trying to keep the story of the sequence not up in with the definition. There we go. Does anyone have any questions, or do you feel like there's anything important to know about Keptn? That, because I know in some of the questions you were answering, or I'm kind of parsing your information and writing down what feels important to the story for me. Is there something I'm missing or you want to capture here, or are there any questions that anyone has?
I think the only thing for me is and I think I mentioned it in the very beginning, the world 3.5 years ago. We don't want to be yet another tool that orchestrates delivery, right? We're not just focusing on the delivery use case, but also to make sure that your system is operating safely based on your objectives in production. Even though we always use the delivery sequence because people understand the delivery sequence, the second big use case is a problem is detected in production, and that can trigger a sequence that first tries to figure out which tool to call to remediate the problem. And then the event subscription comes into real handy because, again, you would subscribe to a tool like a ticketing tool where you automatically create a ticket for any problem to make sure it's all properly tracked, but then use Keptn to execute different tasks to bring the system back to a healthy state, and Keptn automatically validating after these tools are triggered if the system is actually back at a healthy state. So it's very important to understand that Keptn really is there to manage your whole end-to-end application lifecycle from inception until it's in production, until maybe you even phase it out, right? Keptn is there to enforce your SLOs from dev to ops and beyond.
So not just delivery, but remediation and health. Yeah. And did that capture your point well enough?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
And then the second thing, and I know we talked about this in the beginning, right? This is our journey so far. We are approaching Keptn 1.0, which we want to take everything we've built so far, and we know we need to finish a couple of things and then really get to a 1.0 release. But we also learned a lot about the community and what problems really need to be solved and which problems may not need to be solved. And so there's also a lot of thoughts out there from our side in which direction we are going with this project. And this is why in the very beginning, the 4 links you posted one of the links, the second link, that was a link on the Keptn Lifecycle Controller, which is a new project we're kicking off to really solve a big pressing issue that we see that we see in the Kubernetes kind of industry in the Kubernetes ecosystem, is that there's no good concept of managing the life cycle of deployments. And so we are working on this lifecycle operator that hooks into Kubernetes, and every time you deploy with whatever tool, we are automatically creating pre-deployment, deployment, and post-deployment events that allow us to then hook tools into the life cycle of a deployment. For instance, to do pre-deployment validations. Hey, is the environment healthy? Or post-deployment validations. Let's run a test and then evaluate. So we want to solve the problem from a slightly different perspective. Instead of you having to trigger Keptn and basically let Keptn trigger a deployment and then a test. We know there's great tools out there like Argo CD. I think you had a session on Argo CD. You had a session on Tecton. These are all great tools that do GitOps really well. And we want to go into a stage where we want to let these tools do their job really well. They can deploy, they manage their desired state. So they make sure that your GitOps technical desired state is applied. And then where we want to come in is we want to come in and say, every time things get deployed by whatever tool, we want to be there and interject the deployment and do pre-deployment checks and post-deployment checks. And there, again, use our open events to then interact with tools that should be triggered before deployment, after deployment, like sending a notification to Slack, evaluating your SLOs.
That makes a ton of sense. We have a question from Komaraju, which is, where does Keptn fit in the CNCF landscape?
Yeah. So we are in the landscape. As I was just explaining, right, with Keptn 1.0, I think we try to solve a really big problem, and this is also why we sometimes were confused with, are you yet another delivery tool? No, we are not, right? Keptn itself doesn't deliver, and I think you put it perfectly earlier, where you said Keptn itself doesn't do individual tasks. Keptn orchestrates. However, we know there's a lot of other great tools out there as well that, for instance, or let's say the typical process of deploying something into production is probably not where you want to execute a sequence in Keptn. What we have learned from many of our users, they are using a GitOps approach. They're checking something into Git. They let Argo apply these changes. But what is missing is, before Argo does its job, you want to do a pre-deployment check. Can I deploy right now? Is the environment healthy? Do I have enough error budget in production? After the deployment, you want to validate, is everything still green? Now, Argo itself has their own hooks where you can hook into this lifecycle, but there's no standard. Because if you use Argo, it works the Argo way. If you use Flux, it works the Flux way. If you use other tools, they may not have a way. And this is the problem we now want to solve with Keptn, with this lifecycle controller. We want to provide application lifecycle visibility and ways how you can interject and inject your tools in the way I explained it here, with an open protocol into the deployment process, pre and post deployment. And this is the next big thing we want to do.
And so, and like you said earlier, like we talked about earlier, where we keep talking about Argo, for example, like it's Keptn is a more widely scoped tool than Argo to help Argo communicate with all the other tools that Argo might touch. Is that correct?
With the current version
of directly.
Exactly. No, with the current version of Keptn that we have right now, I would agree with. So Keptn tries to orchestrate the end-to-end process, and Argo would be one tool along the way. With what we are thinking right now is, if you have chosen your existing flow, and you have chosen that Argo is the tool that you kick off from whenever you do a pull request, and Argo goes in and deploys, then we want to help you to make sure that Argo is not deploying into an environment that is not ready for whatever reason, and that once Argo is finished, you automatically get all the validations that the deployment went healthy, and you also get the notifications you want. So we want the individual tools to do their job, what they're really good in, but then we want to solve the problems that have not yet been solved. And this is, in the end, making sure that your environments are healthy based on what you consider healthy. So the whole SLO component is still obviously part of what we're doing, what we continue to do, because this is was a big way of success. It's okay.
So I'd like to wrap up. If anyone has any final questions, please let me know. Let us know. I'm going to go ahead and recap everything we talked about to make sure I have a clear understanding and that you've expressed everything that you want to express. So we'll start by talking about the world 3.5 years ago, which maybe, because I don't know if the date's going to live with this recording, let's maybe put a month and year to our 3.5 years ago. So to keep our, so what would that be? We're 2019.
I'm just
July
looking at
2019.
Yeah, it was actually early 2019.
Okay.
I remember we were in Austria in one of the meeting rooms here, and we sat together and had a workshop. It was still not summer. It must have been spring of 2019.
Nice. That's spring of 2019. So, and these days, there even now, currently also, there are many, many tools for end-to-end delivery. If you're considering, like, from the application being source code all the way to it living in production, there are many, many tools along the way. And so not only that, once they're already deployed, there are a bunch of tools that observe and remediate the deployed application. So the problem is there's so much to integrate. Often these integrates have to be custom because each tool has its own API. Another problem is that different teams want different tools to watch different applications within the same organization. And then we also need health checks to make sure everything is running well and as we expect it to. So there's even more coordination needed besides just integrating tools with one another. So that's the problem space where you in Austria in 2019, we're sitting around the table being like, there's got to be a better way. So enter Keptn, which is a control plane that orchestrates all of your DevOps tools to ensure your system is operating based on your objectives. So specifically, it's going to orchestrate using cloud events. So cloud events is a CNCF project that standardizes the way events happen. And within cloud events, you can get more specific and have CD events, which standardizes how continuous delivery tools would express a cloud event. But you briefly said there's something like a testing event.
With the CD events project, we try to standardize the payload that is sent around when we try to integrate with any type of DevOps tools, whether it's a build tool, a deploy tool, a testing tool.
So with that standardization, I think is the key to be able to have all your different tools be able to communicate in a unified way. And so then we're talking specifically how that happens. So the first thing that would happen is like a operations level kind of person would or team would define a process, which in Keptn is called a sequence. So the one we've made here is deploy, test, security, and then validate. So secure and validate what might need to happen. Each of these are event related. So there are 3 stages of events: trigger, start, and finish. So this has been defined for us. And then now if we put on a application team hat or a developer hat, we have the way we want our specific application to exist in the system. So we created a team A that uses Jenkins. So whenever a deploy happens, so whenever a container image gets built specifically is what's kicking off our particular use case. Whenever the deploy happens, because team A is subscribed to a deploy event, then it's going to let Keptn know, it's going to use, what does it do exactly? It's deployed via the Jenkins pipeline. So it uses Jenkins to deploy an event. And then it will let Keptn know when it's finished. And then it will move on to test over here in our main sequence. And then our team A will run some tests based on tests. And so the test is triggering because it's a publish subscribe model. We have 2 different stages from team A that are subscribed to a test event that hears that a test event happened. So that's going to trigger functional tests and trigger load testing. And so and then again, our team A sequence will let it know when it's finished, and that's when it knows to move on to the next task over here, it's called, right? And so then the security will trigger Go, and then the validate triggers Lighthouse for observability. So there are a couple ways to go from here. Let's start with this. So we could have something like Slack that it's basically, because it's a publish subscribe model, we can have lots of different things subscribed to these events. So it doesn't just have to be these specific tools. So one example we used is if the whole team wants to have updates for when these things happen, and then they can use a Slack, for example, to get an example, to get a notification every time a task finishes. But then also when we come to Lighthouse that connects observability tools, then we start to get into not just the delivery part of Keptn, but also the remediation and health. So what's important about talking about the validate and evaluation events is that the team, it makes sure the environment is healthy, but it's the team's responsibility or somebody in the organization's responsibility to define what healthy looks like. And then that brings us over here to SLOs, which is a service level objective, and SLI, which is a service level indicator. So the indicator is defining which piece of the system is being looked at. So like a number of vulnerabilities, memory consumption, or failure rates are all examples. And then the service level objective defines the success of that particular metric. So number of vulnerabilities should be 0. It says it's expressed as a percentage, so 0%. The memory consumption would be expressed as a percentage, and that percentage is what success looks like. Here's a question. When the SLOs are not met and it goes outside of the range that has been defined as success.
Sorry, there was just a hiccup. The question is, what happens when the SLO is outside of the range?
Yes.
Exactly. So when the SLO is outside of the range, the evaluation task will basically fail, which means what we have not discussed. Every time a task fails, you can then also react to it either by executing a different sequence that handles the failure, the failure part, or a successful, and you can also then decide what to do next. Right? In the successful way, you may want to execute another sequence that brings this change into the next stage, let's say from development into staging into production. In the failure, you may want to stop it and just notify people. Yeah.
Okay. So then, yeah, so that's what happens. And then Keptn, again, is a control plane that orchestrates all of your DevOps tools to ensure that your system is operating based on your objectives. So that includes the active it rolling out, but then once it's the whole life cycle, not just the active it rolling out, that it's living in it's out there in the world in a consistently healthy and successful way. Exactly. Just like all of us. I think that's all I have. Do you have anything to add, Andy?
No, I want to just say thank you for the opportunity, and it's an amazing thing that I know you're not in that space. I mean, you're doing these great videos, but it's amazing to see your skills being brought to life, because that's not easy. I've seen this at conferences recently, right, where professionals are really drawing the story, and yeah, it's amazing. I'm just blown away.
Thank you so much. I'm amazed and honored to have you on too. I can't wait to meet you at KubeCon/KubeCon. And we're going, this is if you'll dance with me a little, I'm gonna dance our way out of the episode. Does that sound good?
Yeah, of course. Are we doing some, what are we doing? Salsa? I'm a salsa dancer.
Oh yeah, awesome. Well, show us some salsa moves. I'm going to just play my brother's song that we started the episode with. We'll dance a little and we'll say goodbye. And we have some very excited salsa comments in the chat too. So here we go. Bye everyone.
Bye.
Oh, I have it turned down because I messed up the yeah. I think it's here.